fellow Army veteran, Rob Robinson. Awesome name, of course. Rob is the CEO and founder of Strategic Integrative Solutions, among many other things. He's also, you can find him online, of course. He's got philosophy from the front line, all sorts of fantastic content podcasts that he hosts. Rob, thanks for joining us. And if I could, let's start at the origin story, as I like to say. What got you started? What was the decision or circumstances that led you into joining the service? And specifically, I'm curious about, my beloved Army. How did that come about?
Okay, so family tradition, believe it or not, my grandfather was a sapper in World War II. So he was an
Yes.
engineer, essayons for those guys that actually care.
Yep.
But he was an engineer in World War II. My father served in the Army as well afterwards. So it was family tradition. Like it was the first male in, my family tends to join the military, and that's the way that it was. And so my grandfather did it. My father served 27 years in the Army, so I am an Army brat for all intents and purposes. I don't really have a home because we moved so frequently. Spent time at Fort Benning quite a bit. My dad had a recruiting gig in Colorado, which is just completely weird, but it's the Army. You know what I mean? Like the assignments happen. And
Right.
so did that, came back to Georgia for a little bit, and then I ended up going into college from Western Pennsylvania, where my dad had an ROTC assignment towards the tail end of his career. So he did ROTC at Slippery Rock University. So Slippery Rock University, for those of you guys that don't know, like they ran the ticker on ESPN years ago. So if you're old enough to remember this, like this story because like the teletype went down and the only score that they could get was the SRU game. And so they talked about it on ESPN. And that's a very, very funny story. But uh after that, it was had an opportunity to go to West Point. So I commissioned as a second lieutenant in the infantry and myriad of assignments in there. The main thing that I wanted to be a paratrooper and an airborne ranger. Like I knew in middle school, I told my dad, like, hey, I'm going to be an airborne ranger. I didn't know what branch, I didn't know what MOS I was going to be, but I knew that I want to fall out of planes and walk through the mud. I have no idea why, but definitely that was one of the forming things was my father was an airborne ranger. He was an infantry guy. And so like that's what I grew up seeing. And so it was like, I can do this. So went to West Point, commissioned infantry, had a pretty rough time getting through Ranger School. So I had to go to Ranger School 3 times, which is interesting, but it's a different experience every time because cadre change. The
Right.
school doesn't, but the cadre do. And so sometimes that impacts the way that things go. But graduated from Ranger School in 99 and then went to the advanced course and sitting in the advanced course had the opportunity to take command of a basic training company. So I commanded a basic training company and I was doing change of command inventories on 9/11.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
at that point I was seriously contemplating doing the five and fly, which is typical for West Point officers is they do 5 years in the Army and then they leave. And 9/11 happened and then I was legitimately like, okay, things just got real. This is not going to be a peacetime Army because our formative years as cadets at West Point, we had, Desert Storm was just ending. We had Somalia happen while we were there, but that was particularly special operations. And then Kosovo was kicking off. And so it was like, I don't know if I want to do peacekeeping operations, to be quite frank. I didn't join the Army to do that. I joined the Army to do the mission of an infantry guy. And when 9/11 happened, then it was like, okay, I hit that crossroads and I was like, I'm going to stay now because there's nothing to prevent me. There's nothing that's going to stop me from leading troops in combat. And so that was really the ultimate goal. And after advanced course, PCS to Fort Lewis, I was in the 1st Striker Brigade. That's an interesting story. Believe it or not, I want to introduce you guys to one of my NCOs who's actually writing a book that comes out next month
Hmm.
about our experience because as a 1st Striker Brigade, like we were in a place where either people liked us or they hated us. There was pretty much no middle ground. And the reason why I say that is because the armor community has a vested interest in the M1 tank. Right, wrong, or indifferent, that was their cherished piece of equipment.
Right.
And the Bradley was the cheapest tank in the Army for the longest time. And then it became the Striker in around 2000, 2001. And then years later, it became the MRAP, et cetera, et cetera. Every time we add a new vehicle to the inventory, people tend to want to fight it like a tank, even though that's not the mission set. And so, at Fort Lewis, we had the opportunity to deploy. We were the 1st Striker Brigade to deploy in 2003. We did 2003, 2004. pretty tremendous experience for me, like leading soldiers for the entire time I was in command in Iraq was huge.
Yeah.
And gained a lot of experience from that. Used a lot of experience from my previous life because I was op four at JRTC, and so it was like unconventional tactics in a conventional unit.
Mhm.
Sometimes do not play well, but when you're fighting insurgents, it actually works out pretty well. But the true testament to the success that I had as a company commander, was because I had NCOs. I had non-commissioned officers and enlisted men, and hey, this was before infantry had women, so don't crucify me. But those guys were tremendous, and they had a very challenging pre-deployment cycle. So the guy that was the commander in front of me was relieved. Like I assumed command. I didn't have a change of command ceremony. I literally had the guidon handed to my first sergeant, and the guidon was handed to me, and I was told, "Don't screw it up."
Yeah.
And it was 2 weeks before we went to Iraq. And so, yeah, so that story is pretty intense. And the saving grace of it all was I had two NCOs that I worked with before in previous assignments or previous life that were able to basically advocate for me and say, yeah, the new CEO is okay, and that kept my bacon out of the fire until I proved that I wasn't, a complete idiot. And so there's a lot of, there's a lot of support that came from the non-commissioned officers in the company. And that's why we truly were successful. Do we have casualties? Yes. We had, 41 guys get wounded in the company in the time. And this was long before, ISIS was a thing or Al Qaeda in Iraq was really advertised.
Right.
And so we really had to, we had some days where we fought pretty hard. And then we had days where it was like, really, we're just standing out here on this OP, you know, trying to make sure that we don't fall asleep, and so it's the army though. It's like, just hurry up and wait. There's just
Yeah.
these waves of good things and bad things that happen throughout the course of the year. But we really,
Boredom or chaos. It's really the only two options.
yeah, I mean, particularly, some organizations, particularly those in special operations, they have the advantage of like, hey, you're going in high intensity for 90 days. They drop you in there, they do their thing, and then they leave. And then the rest of it is left to the guys in conventional units that are, walking the beat like the regular cops and interacting with the people and trying to clean up messes that may have been left from the previous unit,
Right.
messes that you made that
Right.
day or the day before, and then trying to set the guys up behind you for success. And so that really is a difficult quandary for an 18-year-old kid that's just out of high school that joined the army because he thought it looked cool, or he was inspired because of the incidents of 9/11, and he's like, you know what, I want to do something to defend my country. And that's
Mhm.
both of those things are great motivations for doing it. But you know young people make young people's mistakes, and so sometimes those are costly. But at the most of the part of it is I can tell you that commanding, while deployed, was one of the most rewarding things. But circling back to the question, why did I join the army? Family tradition. My dad was pretty hard on me about deciding whether if I was going to be enlisted or officer. And, when the opportunity came up to go to West Point, I went to West Point because, for those of you guys that are listening that are serving and are thinking about going to OCS or warrant officer school, the retirement is a little bit better, so you might as well get the perks if you qualify to change over. But yeah, the army is a great place to start. And that's what I tell anyone. If you ask me like, hey, why'd you join the army? Because it was a great place to start. And, you don't have to stay there for 20, 25 years or 30 years or whatever, but you do 5 and you're going to gain some experience, meet some people that you can know and trust, and, do some things that you wouldn't normally do in civilian life.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I can't imagine life if I did not serve.
Yeah.
So, well, you certainly did a lot of traveling over the time that you were in as well. So what year? I guess I'll ask you this first. I'm curious about this because you went to West Point, obviously, so you're surrounded by leaders. That's how you started. Then you had to go through several schools, especially the Ranger School. You had cadre, different cadre, and then you're commanding. Like you said, you had a change of command, an assumption of command, if you will. Throughout all the years, decades really of service, is there one prevailing lesson that you just kind of saw keep replaying where it's like, oh, this is a life lesson? Or perhaps was there one leader you had I know you're a leader yourself, but was there maybe someone in your chain of command that taught you something that was like so meaningful that it kind of like pivoted, or at least it kind of sits there now even today as kind of one of your core lessons?
Yeah, so I can answer both of those questions. So the first part, the first trend that I saw throughout my time in the military, and because I spent so much time with troops, it it's very, very valuable lesson that a lot of people don't learn if they don't have the experience of commanding or being around soldiers for a long period of time. You know, if you're around soldiers for a while, then you pick this up, and nobody will ever tell you this inherently when you're going through any of your, basic training as an officer or of your advanced training where you're learning about your craft. Nobody will ever tell you, like, look, the people in your organization will literally accomplish feats that you would never thought that human beings could do with a little bit of guidance and top cover, particularly at the company level, right? So if you're a company commander, like you are literally in charge of that group of people that work for you. And if you give them the right guidance and you keep the boss off of them, the success that they will have will be astronomical, and that part of it is something that is lost on people that don't lead in the military. And it's, not a lick on them. It's just a lick against them, but they don't even know that it is,
Right.
because it's like, hey, look, if you served in the combat arms profession, like you're around soldiers from day one, you commission, get out of basic course, and then you fall into, your job and you show up as a brand new second lieutenant and you've got 42 lives that you're responsible for. Right. And what they don't tell you is attached to those 42 lives are families, wives, kids. So then you go from 42 people that you're responsible for to like 100. And you're like, holy moly, like I wasn't expecting all this responsibility. I just really wanted to jump out of airplanes and shoot guns and do all the army stuff. Right. So that's part of it. And then, to the leadership, I've had some incredible leaders throughout my career. There's people that I've served with, directly, people that have been mentors to me the entire time I was in the Army. But believe it or not, one of the most important conversations that I had was when I was deployed in Iraq, or actually it was Kuwait, because we were watching operations against ISIS in Iraq and Syria. And, you know, my boss came to me one night and he goes, look, this is a question that I ask every second lieutenant when they join the army, when I have the chance to mentor them. And it's like, what's your legacy? And then you have to think about that. And, as an officer and NCO, you have to determine what you want your outcome to be. And if your outcome to be is like, hey, I want to be a 4-star general, statistically, that's probably not going to happen. We know that because only about a 0.5% of every year group even gets close enough to the flag officer ranks, let alone make it. But your legacy as a leader, and that transcends the military, is what your people do after you're gone, right? Because like while you're there, like I can enforce my will and either rule by fear, intimidation, or inspiration and get people to accomplish tasks that I want them to accomplish. But can they still accomplish those tasks at the same level of performance when I'm not there? Did they learn something? Did they develop? Did they develop skills that they didn't have before you were there? And that question, made me scratch my head for a minute. I was like, dang, like that is really deep, because that was a question that was never posed to me early in my career. It was posed to me towards the second half. But because of the way that the opportunities that I had and the leading that I had done, I could go back and reflect on the guys that went to OCS, the guys that went to warrant officer school, the command sergeant's major, the sergeant's major, the senior sergeant first classes, the guys that got out and had an impact, all those things that were a result of, somebody looking at me and going, yeah, that was pretty inspirational. That guy's awesome. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that part of it is really the most important thing. So it's legacy, but that transcends even like the military. So it's like, what's your legacy with any organization that you serve with? You know, whether it be your job, whether it be your church, whether it be, your your family, how do you leave an impact so people are successful once you leave?
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. So I'm curious now, what year did you I guess I should ask, when did you start thinking about leaving the service? What was that time frame? And then
So
how did the actual transition come about and go for you?
yeah, so the transition was pretty easy. It's like looking at reading the tea leaves of the Army. Once you make lieutenant colonel, either you continue or you don't. And
Mhm.
that's one of the things that the Army doesn't tell you. Like, yeah, you can stay in until 28, but who wants to be a permanent staff guy for the last 5 years of their career? And it's like, yes, it requires some talent, it requires patience. And I used to think when I was younger in the Army, it's like, man, like look at these lieutenant colonels like ready to go. They're just tapping out, you know. And for me, it really got to the point where I had a team of 5 people that I worked with. I got a sixth person, and it literally was a clean split down the middle. Half of them I wanted to mentor, the other half I didn't care about. And when I started to get to the point where it's like, I don't care about mentoring these other 3 people, then it's time for me to go because part of my job as a leader is to mentor all, regardless of how I feel about them. And so when that happened, I was like, okay, let's put the mark on the wall and start working towards that. And transition is never easy. And it's if you do it right, it'll take you 2 to 3 years to do it right. You know, and doing it right means, hey, I'm doing internships that the Army will allow me to do. I'm getting all my medical stuff done while I'm on active duty. So when I separate, I don't have to wait 6 months, 8 months, a year to get my my VA rating. Because like, hey, sometimes your VA rating isn't where it needs to be, and sometimes you have to challenge or go back and reattack it or whatever to get, the maximum compensation. And from my perspective, and this is just me, it's opinion, it's not Department of Defense or VA or anything, but it's like, look, if you do more than 10 years, you should get 100%. And the reason why I say that is because, like, guaranteed, if you wore body armor, your body's jacked up. You know, you've fallen out of an airplane, your body's jacked up. You rode around in a vehicle for months in Iraq or Afghanistan, you've sucked up enough dust to mess your body up.
Wear and tear, and we did not get the extended warranties.
Correct, right? And that's ultimately what it boils down to. And the other piece of it is like, hey, US government and all you civilians out there, these people are sacrificing their youth so you can live their life. And like that part of it is those are things that are never going to come back. I'm never going to be 18 years old again, which thank God I won't be because I won't be as stupid. However, you know, the ability to compensate someone for those experiences that they missed, like, hey, I never got to go to Disney World when I was in the Army, until the tail end of my career. And then I got married, and my wife was like, we're going to Disney World because we need a vacation. You know what I mean? Because it's the Army. Like, nope, I got to keep working. There's things for me to do. I'm not doing that. My wife is like, we're going on vacation. So we planned it and we went. But going to Disney at 40 is completely different than going as an 18-year-old kid coming out of high school. Right. And I never had that opportunity. My family did, which is funny. My family went to Disneyland when they were PCSing to Hawaii while I was going to West Point, which is really not cool. And I still hold a grudge for that. But the reality of it is like missing out on those opportunities. Like we have to compensate you somehow. And yes, there's a laundry list of like discounted vacation stuff that veterans can do. And that's part of those corporations giving back. But even still, it's not enough to compensate. Like if you joined the military at 17 and you stayed in until you were 30, like that's a pretty significant chunk of your life that you're not getting back, you know. But it's not all doom and gloom. I mean, like I appreciate the experience that I have because, I was able to get a master's degree. I was able to, start school using the post 9/11 GI Bill and, accomplish some academic tasks that I would have preferred to do them while I was in uniform, but it became the balancing act of do I miss out on this deployment to go to school or do I deploy? And for me, it was, hey, have gun, will travel. I'm picking up and I'm going out the door. Like I was a newlywed for the first 10 years of my marriage because I was out of the house every other year, you know? And so that part of it is it is what it is, but it's also understanding that that's the culture and the climate of the military and giving back to everyone is very important. But like when I got to the point, like I said, when it was like, I just don't want to mentor people anymore, or there's a certain group of people that I would rather spend my time with rather than broadly with a lot more folks, I knew it was time for me to go.
Yeah. Well, it's good that you caught that because, like you said, coming up, you see a lot of the, forgive the phrase, the old guard there that just, you know,
Yeah. Like, and the last thing that you want to be is you don't want to be the person that phones it in, right?
Right,
Like that is the part that's like, well, and the other piece of it is like we are in a life taking and life preserving business.
right,
So if I'm not good at life taking anymore and I've transitioned to the senior staff stuff and I have to be able to preserve life, if I don't have like subconsciously, if I don't really care about people the same as I care about everyone else, then I can make a mistake because my thought process isn't where it needs to be the most successful for the larger part of the organization. And I think that's with everything with business, with politics, with everything else. Like if you are more concerned with like a certain group of people than you are with, you know, everybody underneath the bell curve is where your target should be. But if you're targeting outside of the bell curve, then you need to make an adjustment. And that's just truly because, you know, your priorities are not aligned with the success of 70% of the organization or the people that you're involved with. And
right,
that's the more important part.
right. Mhm. So, so once you were completely done with the service, what was the what was the time frame between how it started and where you are now? What changed where you're like, you know what, this is what I want to do. This is the path I'm taking now as a veteran. You know, as a we talked about this offline. Like, you know, we all have field manuals of how to become a soldier, but to become a veteran
Yeah.
is a whole different ball game. So what was the pivot there in the circumstances that led you to doing what you're doing now?
Yeah, so as part of the transition, one of the things that I really picked up on was like there is a lack of mentorship in the veteran space, right? There's tons of people that'll tell you, hey, go do this, go do that, go do this, chase money, chase whatever.
Mm,
And all of those are great ideas. But comprehensively, what works for me may not work for you. You know, like you may be the type of person that I legitimately want a 9 to 5 job. I want to wake up in the morning, have my coffee, drive to work, punch in, work at Spacely Sprockets until 4 o'clock, punch out and leave. Right. And that's a very dated reference. So if you're over the age of
oh, I
35,
love that reference.
you'll completely catch it. If you don't, I'm sorry, go
We
back and
just
watch the
became
clips.
best friends. We'll talk about that later. Yeah.
But you know what I mean? Like you could come in and like there are jobs and opportunities like that for people. But what I found through the TAP experience of some of my contemporaries that were leaving in the army at the same time I was that like SFL TAP is as great as a program that it is, it's too broad and it's too generalized. It literally is like, hey, we've got to get the most people through this process with a maximum amount of effect. And that sounds great, but the reality of it is there's people that fall through the cracks. There's folks that are, you know, a friend of mine that's a veteran, it literally took him a decade after retirement to realize that he had a significant medical issue that he probably had the entire time that he was in uniform that went undiagnosed,
Yeah.
you know? And so it's catching those things. And so that's why I have the podcast. And that's why I started, chasing technology because there's a tons of great technologies out there. There's technologies that will help you keep your brain engaged. Like it's an app on your phone. You download the app and you do a couple brain games every day,
Mm.
right? And what does that do? That keeps your mental acuity up because if you are again working at Spacely Sprockets pushing the button, that's not a very demanding job and it doesn't require a lot of problem solving skills. So anything that you can do to keep your brain engaged, it's huge. There's also several nonprofits out there that are doing hyperbaric oxygen treatments and therapies, which are great for folks that have inflammation, PTSD. Like there's a laundry list of, it's not a cure all, but it helps.
Right.
And so understanding all those different aspects of what's out there as a veteran post military service, very, very hard to find. Like everybody knows like Wounded Warrior Foundation and, the Navy SEAL Foundation and all the Lone Survivors Foundation. They're all great foundations. However, it may not be the right fit for you as an individual because maybe you just don't have the time. Maybe you have a full-time job. Maybe veteran advocacy is something that the only veteran you could advocate for is yourself, and that's okay. If you don't have the capability to do anything else, take care of yourself first because you can do more, you know, you can do more for other people than you can for, yourself if you're capable of doing that. But if you can't do it, then you have to focus on yourself first because, again, it's typical scenario like, hey, if you're, you know, lose pressure in the cabin, put your mask on first before you help the people around you, right? Like that's how it goes. And like it seems super cliche to say that, but it's very important. But, you know, one of my really good friends who was my SEMA sergeant major, we would do PT together and we talk. And he was like, "Yeah, you really have a voice for like radio. Have you ever thought of doing a podcast?" It's like, yeah, I have a voice for radio. I've also been told I have a face for radio as well. But but he was like, you should actually seriously, pass all these lessons learned that you've had because you've got a lot of experience and the way to continue to learn. And it's typical adult education model. Like if you want to learn more, you have to continue to learn, right? There's people that can't say, oh, I'm done. I'm academically retired. I say that all the time as a joke, but the reality of it is I learn something new every day. And so if I'm not learning something new every day, then I'm probably not pursuing the right endeavors. And so that's how I ended up, starting a podcast and talking to people about their transition story because again, rarely if ever in the transition process do you get a one-on-one with a veteran that's going to tell you their story and like, hey, these are the pitfalls, the slips, trips, and falls that I had. The end result was this. This is why I made this change, or this is why I changed this resume, or went with this hiring company, or did this event, or whatnot. And we've had some great resources here in North Carolina, which is awesome. So we had a 501c called Patriots Path, and it's been rebranded and renamed. But the lady that was the executive director essentially took everything that you got in SFL TAP, compressed it into a 2-week curriculum, and there's only 15 people in the room, right? Which is huge because, like, yeah, I can go through a resume writing class, but if I'm, number one of 45 in a resume writing class, I'm not going to get the attention that I need. And there's a lot of programs out there for veterans. There's Veterati, there's American Corporate Partnerships that are all out there looking to help you. And literally most of the time, it's just a questionnaire. You get a phone call or email back and say, hey, you qualify, sign up. We're going to give you a mentor for the next year. Right. And it worked out for me because I timed it, appropriately. So I had 6 months with my mentor as I was going through the transition process. So he's helping me rewrite my resume, look for jobs and things like that. And then when I got out, he was able to mentor me. He's like, hey, this is a good move. That's probably not the best thing to do. Hey, maybe look for another job, put your resume out there, because that's another thing that veterans don't get told is, the best time to look for a job is when you have one, you know. And then the other part of it is finding the right fit. And that's a very difficult thing. And that's part of the reason why, I primarily focused on consulting when I got out, because it's like, look, I don't have to stay here with this company for years. If I don't like something that the leaders are doing, hey y'all, my contract's up, I'm out. And that helps a lot. And it gives me, it gives you financial freedom because, like, yes, it could be lucrative at times. But the other piece of it is it doesn't tie me to a particular organization for a significant period of time. And I'm just learning the whole time I'm there, like, wow, I would not do that if I was the boss, And so those are just little notes that I can take with me to the next organization and give them, advice on how to continue to succeed. But at the end of the day, may not be for you. I hate cold calling people, but if I were doing business development or sales, that's a job that I would have to do. But if it's a one-on-one mentorship opportunity with a veteran that's like, hey, I'm really struggling here. Hey, man, let's have the conversation. Or better yet, listen to my podcast because there's a whole laundry list of people that are telling their story and they're all different and they all have something different to take from it.
Yeah, I've been enjoying it. That's the philosophy from the frontline podcast,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
Yeah, and folks, if you're hearing or watching this online now, the link's right underneath Mr. Robinson's bio there. So, yeah, fantastic work. It's and how long has it been since you got out? I'm sorry if you mentioned the year.
No, I didn't. So actually, I've only been retired for a year because I
Okay, I
retired
was
on.
gonna say I knew it
No,
was pretty recent.
I say that jokingly because I retired on February 29th of 2020.
Oh
So
yeah,
I've
yeah.
technically only been retired for a year because I retired on a leap day, and this year's the first leap year since I retired. So that's a great joke.
Yeah.
But that's another thing that I have in common. One of my really good friends, we both retired on February 29th, which is pretty crazy.
Yeah.
But the reality of it is like I've been out for 4 years. It doesn't seem like it's been that long. And the reason why it's because I've remained active. And a lot of it has been pursuing technologies to assist the military to get over the hump for the next war.
Yeah.
And, I'll say this out loud, like if you think it's a conspiracy theory for people to say like, hey, we're at war with China, look at cyber attacks. I'm not saying physically we're not in a two-way shooting match.
Right.
This is the closest thing to, the Cold War that we're going to have. And the military uses the term of the big four. So you've got North Korea, Russia, China, and Iran. And those guys are, they're legitimate threats out there of different flavors. And, we're not in the skiff, so we're not going to break down all the stuff that they're doing.
Right.
However, all you have to do is look at the cyber threat map and see the amount of activity that is going on worldwide. They're doing it, we're doing it, other countries are doing it,
Yep.
and your intellectual property is more at risk than your actual tactics, which is scary. Like, why? Because I can go download a US Army or Russian manual of arms and understand how they're going to fight from a tactical perspective, but from the operational and strategic perspective, everything is happening invisibly. If you look at Ukraine, it's electronic warfare. If you look at everything else that's going on, every time you turn around, like, hey, there's this massive cyber attack, and this company lost hundreds of millions of dollars in intellectual property. Well, guess what, folks? That is the threat right now. It's not day-to-day citizen doesn't see it because it's ubiquitous. Most people now are digital natives ish. Like unless you're like quote boomer or one of these folks that have never had connectivity, like if you live off the grid, then it's probably not going to affect you as much, but it could affect you because of everything that's going on, because everything's so interconnected now. And that's where it becomes scary. It's not the fact that like people are intruding on social media or whatever. It's the fact that influences that those platforms have are changing people's thought process and they don't even know it.
Right.
And that's the scary part. And so I tell everybody, it's like, look, shut your phone off if you can, enjoy the moments around you. And that's hard to do because, like if you like video games, there's great video games that come out every month. If you like movies, there's great movies that come out every month. But the other part of it is like, I have a stack of DVDs and CDs that I have not gotten rid of. And the reason why that is because I enjoy physical media. Because at any point, any one of these companies can pull the plug on the access to your hundreds of dollars that you spent on your Amazon account for movies that you like, right?
Right.
But you could easily go down to, the thrift store now and buy the same DVD for $2 and have it forever, and that's just it sounds paranoid and goofy.
No,
But
not at all. I mean, we have never been, you referenced the Cold War. We've never been this vulnerable. We didn't have, the Cold War, we could go on all day about that, but that seems like child's play to what we're dealing with now.
yeah,
The military trying to keep up on all the threats and cyber, the satellites, the grids, the water treatment. There's so many things that are vulnerable for a number of reasons, not just political, just the fact that technology does advance at a pace that's really hard to,
yeah,
you know, you, you can't just turn on a switch and have, 100,000 new engineers understand the stuff.
yeah.
It takes time. It really takes time. So,
Well, and the other piece of it is like the technology is designed for convenience. It's not designed for security.
right,
And that's the other part that people don't realize. It's like, hey, like why should I care if I'm jumping on this, if I'm jumping on the Wi-Fi at Starbucks, why should I care? Well, you should care. You should have VPN
yep,
or, don't even do it if you can avoid it. You know what I mean? Like that's the real thing. And the reason why you want to do that is not because, you know, the guy that's managing the Wi-Fi at Starbucks is a bad dude and is trying to steal your information, but you don't know who else is trying to access that network that could potentially, cause you harm. And
yeah,
that's it. And that's me putting on my cyber officer hat. So that was the one thing that I didn't say. So in 20 years in the Army, I was an infantry officer. At year 20, they were like, "Hey, you've done math at some point in your life." The Human Resources Command asked me if I would think about going into electronic warfare. So I spent the last 3 years of my career looking at technology, electronic warfare, cyber operations. And so like it comes from a place of like, look, this is a legitimate threat. And the legitimate threat is that you're going to lose all your data before the shot is ever fired. And so that's where it comes from. And it's just interesting to see all the interplay in the world of all the things that are going on. But the reality of it is I truly enjoy just having conversations, making people smarter. And it's like a shark. If a shark stops swimming, it's gonna die. If you stop learning as an adult, like you're gonna die. Maybe not so much in the physical sense,
Yeah.
but in the intellectual sense, like you can stagnate. And that's like part of the difficulty of education is because we want people to be educated, but I don't want you to be tied to an educational institution because you get tied to an educational institution, then it becomes an echo chamber.
Yeah.
And then everything that you hear is peer reviewed, and it's coming right back to the point that you just made. Like, I want people that have diversity of thought. I want people that are going to challenge me. I want to have people that say, hey, like, that doesn't seem right. Well,
Yeah.
let's research it together and find out what the answer is, you know, and that's how we grow as adults, is literally that point counterpoint and developing conversations with people that are going to challenge our ideas. And it's perfectly okay. And I think that's one of the things that as I transitioned from the military, I had to learn how to accept other people's ideas. Because like when you're of a certain rank in a certain position, like your ideas don't get challenged from the bottom up, they get challenged from the top down. That's
Right.
that's a completely different dynamic, but usually that bottom up challenge is probably a lot more relevant to the mission that you're trying to solve than it is from the top down. And that would be the way that I would recommend that you think about it. And again, I'm not an expert. I don't know much about everything. I know a little bit about a little bit, and I'm really good in the areas that I'm good at. But I really encourage people just continue to learn, continue to be open to new experiences. Like I wouldn't like somebody asked me like, "Hey, would you ever go skydiving?" No, I'd never go skydiving. It's not because I don't want to jump out of a plane again. It's because like I did static line for so long, and I got a lot of aches, pains, and injuries. Like I'm not,
Yeah. Yeah.
like well, it's the softest landing you'll ever have. With my luck, it won't be. And so those are the things that I like to do. It's just literally spend time with your family, spend time with your friends, make a little money when you can
Yeah.
and just enjoy your retirement because retirement does not have to be a death sentence. And I think some people think that, you know, I just got to work until the bitter, bitter end. Like, yeah, you can do that, but your family will not thank you. But if you're like, hey, let's take a weekend trip to the beach or go to the mountains or spend some time, you know, chatting with somebody that you've never met, but they seem pretty interesting, that is a way to, keep yourself alive, keep yourself vibrant and just explore and enjoy your life.
Yeah. Well said, sir. Well, let me ask you for folks listening, we have listeners all over the place. So if someone wants to engage you with consultant work, what's the best way that you would prefer they get in touch with you and explore some options?
Yeah, I live on LinkedIn. So like if you
Live
need
on
it,
LinkedIn. Yeah, I
yeah,
love that.
yeah. And I say that because like I've made legitimately lifelong friends from trolling people on LinkedIn or they trolled me, you know. And I say that it as a joke because it's like trolling is a bad thing, but like legitimately, I had a guy reach out to me and be like, "Hey, look, you're doing some pretty interesting stuff. Want to get to know more about, what you guys are doing. Is there a way that I can come visit?" Yeah, absolutely. Guy came out, and fast forward 4 years later, we're still friends. You
Oh,
know,
that's cool.
and so that's that's how it works. But what makes the relationship work is the fact that we connected not just on business, but we connected on things in our personal life. Like, oh, he's a big football guy. He
Mhm.
likes Star Wars. He likes, all the nerdy stuff that, most guys our age like, and so what it was, we connected over that stuff and the business just happened to be, you know,
Yeah.
a secondary part of it. And I think that's like the real key to success is finding people that are like-minded, that have goals, but like all you have to do, I'm probably the only Rob Robinson two on LinkedIn. Just look me up and you can find me and I'll be more than willing to have a conversation with you. If
Yeah.
you're a veteran out there and you want to tell your story, like I don't want to steal any of your thunder because this is your
No,
show.
no, no.
But but if you're a veteran and you want to tell your story, please reach out. I'm a big time college football fan too, so I work on a college football podcast. We talk about Army football all the time. So
Yeah.
we're ramping up for football season and like this time of the year, like quite frankly, I'm looking forward to college football because like politics is not, it's not about competition anymore. It literally is about like who can pass the worst zingers. And like, I don't need that in my life. I just want good, healthy competition, that doesn't, weigh how many taxes I'm going to pay in the background, you know, on who wins or loses. But the reality of it is it's just like I do a lot of podcast work, and the reason why I do is because it's easy. It's content that's easily accessible, readily available, and again, if you know how to use your phone, as if we were talking about in the beginning, like they're pretty easy to find, and that's the other part of it is like once you find something that you enjoy, take advantage of it. Like there's hundreds of thousands of voices out there. It doesn't have to be mine. It doesn't have to be yours. It just has to be something that you can connect with. And if it's something that you can connect with and it causes you to learn, highly encourage that.
Yeah, agreed, sir. Well, my final question is always a fun one. You mentioned Star Wars, right? So it's you're in my lane there, but I like time travel. I kind of obsessed about that. When I'm not reading, history or business literature, I'm the fantasy readings I like to do is time travel related. So my final question is a fun one. If you had just 1 minute with your younger self prior to joining the service and learning all the things that you're still on a path of knowledge now, but go back all the way to your, before West Point, let's say, what would be the guidance, warning, advice, encouragement, whatever? If you had just a minute or so with your younger self, what would be the message? What would you say?
If I had a minute with my younger self, I would just tell them always choose the job that is the most fun. Always choose the job that's the most fun because the job that may be the most challenging may not be the most rewarding, or it will be rewarding, but it won't be rewarding in the sense that you want. So, for example, there was a fork in the road in my career where I had the opportunity to be a general's aide. I did not take that job. And the reason why I didn't take that job was for some reasons that did not sit well with me. Had I taken that job, I may not be on the phone with you right now having this conversation because I may have achieved a higher rank. But the other part of it is like I would have missed out on a year of company command, you know, at the Ranger Training Brigade, several operational deployments, so like when you hit that fork in the road, it goes back to the previous discussion is how cool do you want your shadow box to be? Like I can be a general's aide and have a really cool coin from that GO that I was an aide from, or I could go lead soldiers and be the warrior that I signed up for the military to do. And so like that's what I would tell my younger self is always pick the fun job or the job that keeps you closest to soldiers because those will be more rewarding for you than the other ones. And I had one of my bosses say this, and it was one of the most profound statements that I had ever heard in the military, and I've always passed this on to other people, is your best day on staff will never outweigh your worst day in command. And so if you have the opportunity to lead, like everything could be going haywire, but you're in charge and you can actually have an impact. If you're a staff guy, you're making recommendations. And when that was told to me, I was like, I'm writing that down and keeping it forever because that's one of those things that, like, yeah, it's always more rewarding taking action than it is making a recommendation. Hey, I suggest we do this. Because at the end of the day, they may not listen to you. And then you're just going to be frustrated and it changes the dynamic of your work environment.
Right.
But if you're in charge and you're saying, hey, we're doing this and everybody's executing, like you can have that conversation with the person that's like, I don't know if this is the right thing to do. Okay, I'm going to pull you aside. We'll talk and we'll figure it out while everybody else is continuing to move in the direction that was given to them. And maybe it's a control freak thing, or maybe it just the reality of it is being in charge is, in my opinion, significantly better than, making recommendations.
Yeah, fantastic, sir. Well, folks, I hope you enjoyed this talk as much as I have with retired Army soldier for life, as we're all saying nowadays, Rob Robinson. Check out the work he's doing. Check out the fantastic podcast and everything else. His consultant work. You can find his bio and everything on our main page here. Show him some support. Check out what he's doing. And I can't thank you enough, sir. Thanks for continuing to serve our country and fellow veterans. It means a lot to me personally, and I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you. Like this has been a blast. I love doing these, and I tell people that all the time. Like I'll have a conversation with someone on a podcast or something long term, and it's just like that was awesome. And the reason why it's awesome is because it's like I get to know somebody. And one of the values, unfortunately, that stemmed out of the pandemic was everybody, majority of people now, 70%, know how to do virtual meetings now. And because we know how to
Right.
do virtual meetings, there's a lot of power in the ability to look at somebody face to face and have a conversation with them, even though they're hundreds or thousands of miles away. And so I appreciate you taking the time. Like, again, folks, this is the power of LinkedIn. This was a cold hit,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. We
Hey,
met on LinkedIn. Yeah.
yeah, I've been listening to your podcast. This is pretty cool. Is there any way that you would want to come do this? Right? Like that's how it works. So, don't be afraid to put yourself out there. I know there's a community of guys that, live behind fences in the Army that don't have those capabilities yet. But I would encourage you as you come out for air and transition away from those opportunities, start connecting with people because, the secret to LinkedIn is two things. One is night shifts. So if you're ever on night shift, that's a great time to connect with people, particularly if you're deployed. Because like the last 3 years I was in, that's what I would do is would connect with people when I was on night shift. Because guess what? People in the other time zones are awake while everybody else is sleeping, and like there's nothing going on in activity in country. So it's like, hey, I'm going to reconnect with this person and write a LinkedIn recommendation. But the other part of it is always connect with people that you used to work with and people that used to work for you, because you'll be surprised the people that used to work for you are probably doing some pretty cool stuff, and you can connect with them just because they may be in an industry or career field that you would like to know more about, or it's just cool to catch up with people that you haven't talked to in a while. And usually you can tell how well the relationship is like if you start talking and you haven't talked for 10 years and it's like picking up where you left off, that's probably a relationship that was still worth having. If you're like, that person's kind of like, and they feel the same way about you, it probably wasn't one of those that needed to happen. But again, it's just taking advantage of the opportunity. But again, LinkedIn is a very powerful tool. And yeah, don't be afraid to tell your story. And I think a lot of veterans play it too close to the vest because like I don't want to be the dark and brooding veteran sitting over in the corner, staring at his shoes. Like, no, that's not who we are.
Mm.
We have some experience that would make people cringe. Yeah, absolutely. Because it's scary, like deploying and doing all the things that we did. Not fun every day, but the good days certainly outweigh the bad ones.
Yeah. Agreed, sir. Well, folks, in uh in his honor, here's a fun song from none other than the U.S. Army Band.
Nice.
Take a
Thanks.
short break. We'll be ready for that. Stand by.